Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another exploration around King's Lynn in Norfolk. This castle has been highly anticipated by us and we've wanted to find the perfect day to enjoy a visit at this famous 12th century Norman castle. Serving its time as a hunting lodge and a royal residence, not only does this place have a wealth of ornately decorated architecture and lavish stonework, but it tells the story of a treacherous queen who lived here and who is said to haunt the remains. Join us and take a walk to discover Castle Rising. To make your way into the castle ruins, you walk over the bridge between the outer and inner ward and towards the gatehouse that protects the castle. The remains in the gatehouse suggest that there would have been a few floors here, as there are traces of a staircase. Most gatehouses have the gatekeeper's accommodation above, but as you enter through the gatehouse and into the castle, you're firstly drawn to the very ornate and beautiful keep. This 12th century castle began its life in around 1140 by prolific castle builder William de Albini. He was a Norman nobleman and fought loyally for King Stephen, who then in turn created him as the first Earl of Arundel. He also had the direct possession of Arundel Castle in Sussex, and built a leper hospital near Castle Rising. The name Castle Rising is from the Norman and Anglo-Saxon origin. It develops from a mix of Old English and Norman French for a castle close to the settlement, and in the Domesday Book, Rising is a listed settlement with a village owned by Odo, the half-brother of William the Conqueror. Our journey into the keep starts with the basement level, and it's so beautiful to see how weathered this roofless keep actually is. It adds to that haunting atmosphere. You're able to gaze up at the various windows, fireplaces, and also the great chamber above. The Albini family line died out in 1243, and the castle and manor was passed on to the Montault family, who, similar to the Albinis, were another powerful Norman family. Sadly, the Montault family also passed and died out in 1331, after which it became the ownership of its most famous and spoken about resident, Queen Isabella. Isabella was the wife of King Edward II and the youngest surviving daughter of Philip VI of France and Joan I of Navarre. Isabella was known for her beauty and intelligence, and was portrayed as being a femme fatale on many occasions. Breaking point for the couple followed on when Edward had close ties with Hugh Despenser. Isabella could not stand him and chose to find happiness in a relationship with exiled Marcher Lord Roger Mortimer. It was unclear when this relationship actually started, but it was very clear that the both of them wanted to see Edward and the Despensers moved from power. Even though she wasn't a direct killer or the murderer, it's likely that she would have been involved in some way with the death of her husband. The castle had ties with its agriculture, so it would have been very well supplied from locally sourced vegetables and ingredients to keep the castle's inhabitants well fed. There is also a deep well in the middle of this room, which would have been the main water source for the castle. This was an area where they kept all of their storage. It was never used for prisoners or servants. Back in its heyday, guests would have once walked into the forebuilding and up the grand stairs to the waiting room, where you were firstly drawn to the beautifully decorated Norman archway. This was once the original doorway into the great hall beyond, but is now a 16th century fireplace with stunning detailing, with a dogtooth zigzag pattern around the pillars. The tiles behind the perspex glass on the fireplace were found near a kiln near Borsey, and placed here in the 19th century. The entrance we use to the first floor was created after this original arch was blocked up. I love to see all of the small details like the carved masonry amongst the weathered white brick. Just outside the wooden doors is the grand staircase. This would have looked incredible back in its day. It was richly decorated and had elaborate corbels and sculptured masks. Now it makes for some really beautiful photographs, but back then it was such a beautiful entranceway for guests to be wowed by the wealth of the keep. After ascending the stairs, we are greeted with an overview of what was once the Great Hall, but before we explore that, we take a wander down the dense wall passage that was set into the thickness of the walls after the Great Hall floor had collapsed in the 16th century. This was the easy route to take you to the hall's very small kitchen. Surely a kitchen of this size wouldn't be sufficient for the amount of guests that would have enjoyed a feast here. But this is why later on we will show you the additional kitchen range that was built. Edward died during the night of September the 21st at Berkeley Castle, where he was imprisoned and possibly murdered, on the orders of the new regime. Later speculations say that if Edward wasn't murdered, then his death may have been from depression following his imprisonment. Just through a passage next to this kitchen was the guardrobes, making sure that the guests would have had comfortable and convenient routes for the toilets whilst being wined and dined. Coming back through and seeing across the flawless shell of a grand hall, it would have been the largest and obviously the most beautiful decorated room in the keep. Even with its floors and ceilings disappeared, you get to imagine life in the 12th century, when the lord and lady would have sat on their thrones, delivering judgments, giving out their orders or ruling at the high table during their grand feasts. It was recorded here that in this room famous guests such as Edward the Black Prince and King Edward III had royal feasts here and listened to the sounds of medieval minstrels' music. Standing inside the chapel, which was attached to the Great Chamber, and you can see the vestibule, which would have been a small area for some of the holy items to be placed, including the Bible. This room would have been more than likely the area for the Lord and Lady to do their private blessings and prayers in peace. Many people assume that Isabella became a prisoner at Castle Rising, but she was never imprisoned. She merely made Castle Rising her home and residence for many years to come. New buildings were created for her in the grounds, and the foundations of these dwellings can be seen just outside the main structure of the keep. It's been noted that Isabella spent a lot of time travelling outside of her residence, and it was often visited by her son King Edward III and the Black Prince, who was her grandson. Both the king and prince spent their time at the castle hunting and indulging in falconry. It was after her death in 1358 that the castle was still being used for entertaining, but it fell into disrepair during King Henry VIII's reign. Later, in a major exchange of land between King Henry and the 3rd Duke of Norfolk, the castle became the property of all of the Dukes of Norfolk. We make our way around the spiral staircase. We enter into the White Room, as it's known, which is quite unusual when you step inside, because it doesn't quite match the other interior of the keep. If you have a good look around though, you can see the various patterns in the floor tiles that we thought was quite interesting. Later, in a major exchange of land between King Henry and the 3rd Duke of Norfolk, the castle became the property of the Howard family. Thomas Howard was infamously the uncle of both Catherine Howard and Anne Boleyn, who were the 2 queens of England executed by King Henry VIII. The family added no repairs or additions to the castle, and it was used mainly by lords to provide some building material for the other buildings in the manor. It was also used for a number of years by squatters who had gained their access through holes in the wall that they had made. Later on in the 19th century, the castle was restored by the Howard family, who let the English Heritage carry out extensive excavation and restoration works too. But ultimately, the castle still belongs and is in ownership of the Howard family. This then leads on to the upper chamber, which was the only room on this floor. Sadly, we climb the stairs again to be met with a locked door. But fear not, if you wait till the end you can get a good view of overhead and see just what's behind that door. The site consists of this stunning keep, which was actually modelled on Norwich Castle. If you have the time to look it up, you can definitely see the resemblances and the shape of the keep. Rising is surrounded by over 12 acres of earthwork defences, but originally the defences were topped by a perimeter wall. Now very little remains, but the earthworks are in great shape. You can make your way up the earthen banks for an overview of the castle keep, the inner bailey and the stone remains. From what people have researched and know about how Isabella liked to furnish a home, her apartment would have been decorated with black carpets and white walls, and her books were made here for her private library. Isabella enjoyed hawking in the castle's deer park, as did her son, but the remains of her apartments are of stone foundations near the 15th century kitchens just outside the keep. Her buildings included an outer chamber that was connected by a corridor to private chambers and an ensuite toilet. The larger remains are of the external kitchen that was first built in the 13th century, but then later added to provide newer features and upgrades, like the ability of being able to smoke the food. The guests enjoyed sumptuous meals and feasts, such as game, swan and wild boar. The castle was never built for war or for the purpose to defend them. It was always that little bit more than a residence too. It was a statement of wealth, status and power, which was so often the case in those days. It was unclear why the castle was built where it was, but the ideology that there was plenty of silver car available, which was the best building stone in East Anglia that you could get your hands on, might have swayed William. Interestingly, there was great access to the sea, and William used this to his advantage, when he used the river to bring back Barnack stones from Lincolnshire and Cairnstone from Brittany. Both these stones were very specialised and sought after, which you can see throughout the more decorated parts of the castle. One thing I love about castles is that they can be anything from complete and livable to ruined and romantic. This has a bit of both and throws in a theme of being haunted too, by a former resident, Queen Isabella, who is said to wander the keep with her spirit, still going by the name of She-Wolf of France. As with many paranormal stories, it will always be a grey area until proven right or wrong, but legend has it is that she haunts the castle with her pet wolf, her dress swishing on the steps just outside the White Room, and the sounds of a faint wolf howling through the air. She is mostly said to haunt the upper rooms of the keep, especially again in the White Room, where she would spend most of her time sewing. When visiting the keep, especially alone like we were, you definitely get an aura of coldness and a sad feeling, which could have well been Isabella making her presence known. Within the inner bailey, the remains of an early Norman church can be seen, discovered in the early 19th century when the bailey was being cleared of accumulated sand and soil. It is thought to be the earliest building within the site, predating even the castle itself. Dating from around the 11th century, it is thought to be the first parish church of Rising, as there's no other parish church to be found, and was probably replaced by the current 12th century church when the castle was founded. We've really enjoyed visiting, experiencing, and exploring the unspoilt ruins of Castle Rising. We came out of season, so the place was empty and atmospheric. We have memberships with the English Heritage, so our visit here was free. And although the place was unmanned at the time of visiting, on weekends and in peak times, the shop and entrance fee resumes. At the time of this video, it's £5 to enter for adults, £3.50 for children, but be wary that there aren't many facilities on site. Luckily, the local village of Rising is just under 5 minutes walk from the castle, and there is a beautiful cosy tea room and a lovely pub named the Black Horse Inn, worth popping into if you're wanting refreshments in the area. Otherwise, pack a picnic and sit amongst the ruins and enjoy. The ruins aren't accessible for wheelchair users inside the keep, but you can still get a great overview of the decorated castle from the outside, and be able to explore the stone remains around the ground. Parking here is free and plentiful, and it's best to check the English Heritage website for opening times, as they can vary throughout the year. A trip to King's Lynn isn't complete without a wander at Castle Rising. You can also take a wander to our previous visit at St James's Ruin, or head to Sandringham Estate, which is a 6-minute car journey away from Castle Rising. If you've enjoyed our visit and our video, please be sure to hit that like button. Consider joining our Patreon to help us travel further, or subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. We want to say a big thank you for watching, and a big thank you to our Patreons for their support. We'll see you on the next one. Till next time.